Hey everybody, Wayne Lambert here from SDI Suspension Direct Incorporated, and I'm here to take you through the install of our new SDI E-CLIK active suspension system. We're going to be putting it on a 4-door Jeep JL Rubicon today. We'll jack the vehicle up, place it securely onto jack stands, and remove both front wheels. So now we're down here and we're going to remove the stock shock. We're going to use an 18mm wrench and an 18mm socket on an impact, and we're going to be removing the stock hardware and saving that to install the SDI E-CLIK shock later. It can be helpful to have your jack underneath the differential of the front axle to keep the axle from drooping out when you remove the stock shock. When removing the stock shocks, we'll start at the bottom. There's a bolt and a nut on the bottom fastener. We'll use a wrench on the nut and a socket on the bolt. We'll remove that, and we'll keep that hardware to install the SDI E-CLIK shocks later. Now we'll remove the top shock bolt with an 18mm socket. And once that bolt is removed, we'll set that aside to use later to install the SDI E-CLIK shock. Install the new SDI E-CLIK shock. Starting at the top mount, we'll place the stock bolt through the shock eye. Now we'll move to the bottom shock mount and use the stock bolt and nut and tighten them with an 18mm wrench and an 18mm socket. Now that you've got those bolts snug, we'll go back and tighten the top bolt to 80 foot-pounds, and then we'll tighten the bottom bolt and nut to 75 foot-pounds. Now we'll move to the other side and repeat this process. We're going to reinstall the front wheel. Check clearance between brake line and tire by turning the front wheels fully left and right. Remove the jack stands. Torque your lug nuts to your wheel manufacturer's suggested torque specification. Now we're going to move to the rear of the vehicle. We'll start by securely blocking the front wheels, safely jacking the vehicle up, and placing it onto jack stands. Then we'll remove both of the rear tire and wheels. It can be helpful to have your jack underneath the differential of the front axle to keep the axle from drooping out when you remove the stock shock. Then we're going to remove the rear inner plastic fender by removing 3 8mm screws using an 8mm socket and a ratchet. Then we're going to unbolt the bottom bolt of the shock using an 18mm socket and an 18mm wrench on the nut. And finally, we'll unbolt the top shock bolt using an 18mm socket. Keep all of that stock shock hardware aside because we're going to use that to reinstall our new SDI E-CLIK active shocks. To install the SDI E-CLIK shock, we'll start by sliding the shock into the top mount. We'll install the stock bolt and then tighten with an 18mm socket. Initially leave it loose so that you can swing the shock up and get the lower mount of the shock into the axle mount. Then we'll replace the stock bolt and nut and tighten those with an 18mm socket and an 18mm wrench. Now that you've got those bolts snug, we'll go back and tighten the top bolt to 80 foot-pounds, and then we'll tighten the bottom bolt and nut to 75 foot-pounds. Now it's time to modify the inner fender that we removed in the previous step. We start by installing this template that defines the cut lines. And then we're just going to take a regular utility knife, make sure you have a nice sharp blade in that, and then we're going to cut along the outside edges of the template to clearance for the new SDI E-CLIK shock. We will start by placing the template that will define our cut lines. We apply them here, and the outside edges of the template will define where we are going to cut with our sharp utility knife. When you are finished cutting along the outline of the template, this is what you will be left with on your inner fender. Now we are going to head over to the vehicle and reinstall this. Next, we'll reinstall the plastic inner fender that we modified in the previous step by using our 8mm socket and reinstalling those bolts. Now we'll move to the other side and repeat this process. We're going to reinstall both rear tires and wheels, remove the jack stands, torque all of your lug nuts to the wheel manufacturer's suggested torque specification. So that completes the installation of the SDI E-CLIK Active Shocks. Click the link and it'll take you to installation video part 2, installation of the electronics.